Hello everyone, Andrea here. Welcome to this week's e-learning in the workplace topic. Rob, Kelly, and I are pleased to present this information to you, and we hope you find it as interesting as we do. In our presentation, we will provide you with an overview of the issues, questions, and concepts raised in each of the 3 articles. We will also explain the activities we have in store for you this week and introduce the discussion questions we'd like you to answer. We'll conclude by drawing some common themes amongst the articles. I'm going to start off by talking about Becker, Newton, and Sewang's article. The objective of this article was to identify barriers to e-learning adoption in the workplace, and also to understand how learners perceive those barriers. They identify 3 main barriers to e-learning that should be addressed in the workplace. They are issues surrounding the nature of e-learning as a learning approach, concerns about the use of technology, and issues with time constraints and potential interruptions during e-learning. For the purposes of Becker, Newton, and Sewang's research, they used the following definition of e-learning: instructional content or learning experiences delivered or enabled by electronic technology. They indicated some benefits of e-learning, which include the ability to tailor it to the needs of the learners, being able to update it quickly for greater accuracy and long-term usefulness, and the ability to create environments that almost exactly mimic face-to-face situations. The article also indicates some drawbacks of e-learning, such as a higher level of thinking and engagement may not occur without facilitation as a part of e-learning. Also, e-learning can be impersonal and isolating for the learner. Thinking about these things, what are your initial thoughts on e-learning? Do you think that the pros outweigh the cons? The article notes that technological barriers exist when it comes to implementing e-learning in the workplace. Change management is a common theme in the literature. That is, organizations must be ready to adapt to the technological requirements of e-learning in order for it to be implemented successfully. One study noted that those who adopt new technologies first are more likely to experience the most challenges, so being prepared is essential. Like most barriers, internal and external factors are at play when it comes to technology adoption. First off, you have internal attitudes and individual competencies that will affect how an individual will react to e-learning implementation. Then we have many external factors such as availability and accessibility of the technology, quality of technological support, and development of skills at both the learner and the educator levels. Some barriers that transcend the internal-external categorization were time constraints in the workplace, lack of funding, and an overall culture of resistance in adopting the new technology. The latter is a common theme that you will see in all 3 articles. Muhlenberg and Berg identified 8 workplace barriers to e-learning and found that lack of social interaction was the most significant barrier, followed by administrative and instructor issues, lack of time and support for e-learning studies, and learner motivation. It was noted that a lot of the literature in place about e-learning has been conducted in educational rather than corporate settings. This article focused on one industry only, and they also used very broad, inconsistent definitions of e-learning when the participants were responding. This might have an effect on the results that they found on e-learning. Also, they noted that there's not many studies that focus on organizational e-learning and how to successfully implement it. Here's a review of the 3 key factors that Becker, Newton, and Sewang identified as a result of their research. I won't go into too much detail on their methodology in the interest of time, but here are the 3 key elements that we hope will spark some discussion this week. The first is the nature of e-learning as a learning approach. There's some concerns about the validity and effectiveness of e-learning and the lack of personal touch. There's also the concern that e-learning doesn't account for learning styles. The second factor is the use of technology. We have lack of skills, anxieties about the use of computers, and concerns about the physical impact of e-learning. There's also lack of time and potential interruptions when people are trying to learn in the workplace. This article concludes that the main issue at stake with e-learning implementation is actually addressing perceptions of e-learning in the workplace. In order to successfully implement an e-learning technique, participants have to be reassured that it will work, and they also must be given the opportunity to engage actively with the material and with other learners. The notion of attitudes towards e-learning is a theme that you'll keep seeing over the course of our presentation. Now for the fun stuff. We have a couple e-learning activities that we'd like you to try. The first is an application called Duolingo, which helps you learn languages. You can either download the app, create a profile, and save your progress, or you can complete the activity as an anonymous guest user. Reminder, English isn't allowed. The second activity is to copy and paste the following link into your web browser and complete 3 questions on hand washing. This brings me to discussion question number 1. We'd like you to reflect on the e-learning activities we had you try. We picked these 2 activities for a reason, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts on them in the discussion area. So, after you try the activities, tell us which elements of the activities appealed to you and which didn't, and why you think that might be the case. Specifically, we want to know if you encountered any barriers when completing the activities and, if you did, which ones. Can you connect the experiences you had with any experiences in your own workplace? Explain. I'm going to pass you on to Kelly. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to your feedback in the discussion area.
Thanks, Andrea. Hi, everyone. This is Kelly, and I'd like to provide you with an overview of Laura Servage's article from the Journal of Workplace Learning. In her article, Servage explores some issues that she finds have not been addressed in the current literature. Her purpose was to review North American e-learner practitioner literature to explore and examine how e-learning terminology is vague and inconsistently applied, the need for consistent language across disciplines, and how vocabulary and metaphors reveal attitudes and values present in organizational learning strategies. Servage quotes a number of authors' definitions of e-learning. The first is Welsh's 2003 definition, which is the use of computer network technology, primarily over or through the internet, to deliver information and instruction to individuals. Next, the Commission of Technology and Adult Learning defines e-learning as the instructional content or learning experiences delivered or enabled by electronic technology. And the Conference Board of Canada defines e-learning as using information and communications technologies to deliver content on a one-way or two-way basis. So far, you'll notice that these definitions are pretty general and don't delve much into the depths of e-learning. Servage points out that all definitions include the possibility of learning from information delivered electronically, but the definitions are not comprehensive and leave a lot of questions about e-learning. Servage points out the all-encompassing nature of e-learning and how it is addressed in many different fields of study and practice. People in K-12 education, human resources, instructional technology, and post-secondary education use e-learning, they study it, and publish papers on the topic. However, because of the disparate nature of these fields, the existing definitions are too vague and general. Consequently, the definitions are not useful. Some publications go beyond a simple definition and look at setting out frameworks and taxonomies for e-learning. These frameworks answer the what and how of e-learning and can address topics such as how collaborative e-learning is, the degree of structure, and whether it is synchronous or asynchronous. But even the frameworks do not answer how the e-learning tools are used, valued, and ascribed meaning in the workplace. Servage asserts that the entire field of e-learning needs a framework that incorporates experiences and meaning-making and bridges the culture gap between educators and executives. In her introduction, Servage mentions that there are gaps between corporate interests and learner needs, which result in gaps between the intended and experienced curriculum. The framework needs clear, consistent terminology and answers not only the what and how of e-learning strategies, but also the why. Servage also maintains that corporate North America needs to critically examine e-learning strategies, terminology, and frameworks. The discussion of these key aspects is crucial to a cohesive e-learning framework and definition. Servage reviewed literature surrounding e-learning in workplace applications and found that it is represented through different language and metaphors, primarily industrial factory metaphors and outcomes. She talked about how knowledge and learning are considered commodities, and also cost savings, bottom line, or return on investment take priority. The literature underlines how speed, efficiency, and controlled production of knowledge and learning is important to companies, and there's also a tone of alarm, urgency, and again speed to the literature. In many organizations, learners are treated as customers, and e-learning is trackable and monitored by employers looking for a return on investment. While industrial metaphors are appealing to executives and those in decision-making positions, they do have their limitations. Servage identifies these limitations on the industrial metaphor in that it allows for only a narrow understanding of the true value of workplace learning. The impact of e-learning can't be measured by just performance, and outcomes can be difficult to assess. Also, by looking to avoid cost, executives may be overlooking options that would foster innovation and creativity. These are great points, but I think Servage could have strengthened her argument by defining what she thinks the true value of workplace learning is. Again, focus on the economics or return on investment can lead to a quick fix mentality, and a sense of urgency can lead to poor or rushed decision making. There is a tendency with the industrial metaphor to focus on the technology itself instead of the needs of the learners. Many proponents of e-learning promote its anytime, anywhere advantage, but not all employees will necessarily value that, since they are unlikely to want to complete workplace e-learning from home or on their lunch breaks. And as I'm sure we can all relate to at times, being fatigued by the internet or computer use can be a drawback for the learner. As with any method of disseminating information or training workers, technology does have its limitations. It takes time and effort on the part of a person to create a vibrant online community. People, not technology, are the key to productive and dynamic working relationships. Technology cannot create a productive working relationship, although it can function as a platform where a productive working relationship can take place. Also, some e-learning proponents sell e-learning as a panacea to all training needs, and Servage asserts that it is not. Servage concludes that learning and social contexts are interdependent, so technology cannot function in the same way a person can. Also, trade and industry literature can represent e-learning in a way that suggests that economics and technology are more important than learner needs. Overall, e-learning strategies need a human touch, and for that to happen, decision makers need to learn about learning itself before implementing e-learning strategies. Now I'd like to introduce the second discussion question for this week. In an e-learning context, do you think it is possible to balance the interests of the organization with the needs of the learner? So now I'm going to turn it over to Rob, so thanks for listening and have a great day.
Hello everyone! Thanks for continuing to listen to our presentation on e-learning in the workforce. I hope you've enjoyed some of the points that Andrea and Kelly have brought up. We're now going to review the paper, The Use of E-Learning in the Workplace, a systematic literature review. As the name describes, it is a literature review that looks at existing academic, professional, and gray literature to identify, appraise, and synthesize relevant studies on e-learning in the workplace. I get the sense that the authors wanted their findings to contribute to the growing body of information on e-learning so organizations can make the most informed decisions regarding e-learning and learning technologies. What I found particularly interesting was that it found a significant difference between large companies and small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs, in terms of their strategic thinking, adoption, and use of long-term planning of e-learning. The authors were interested in understanding the extent of use and impact of e-learning in the workplace. This led to a couple of sub-questions, like what measures or criteria determine the success of e-learning, or what factors determine its influence or impact. This study certainly contains a lot of information. Generally, learning technologies are being used extensively in the workplace at all levels. The extent and utilization of e-learning varied significantly by organizational size, and SMEs are not positioned as well as large companies when it comes to integrating e-learning. While we will talk more in depth about the effects organizational size has on e-learning, the article points to the volatile nature of the SME's marketplace and resource constraints as a main reason for this difference. It's important to note that learning technologies in the article is very broadly defined as online courseware, virtual classrooms, or blogs, and the terms e-learning and learning technologies are used interchangeably. The factors affecting the use of learning technologies were found to be organizational size, type of business functions supported, technologies in use, purpose or intention, strategic versus tactical, and type of learning, formal versus informal. While the review looked at these factors individually, many of them can be seen as being influenced by the organizational size. When we look at organizational size, it is important to remember that the study was unclear about how they defined this number. For tax and data collection purposes, countries often define these organizations differently. For example, in the EU, the category of micro and small and medium-sized enterprises is made up of enterprises with fewer than 250 people and which have an annual turnover not exceeding 50 million euro and or an annual balance sheet not exceeding 43 million euro. In the US, Small Business Administration sets the small business criteria based on industry, ownership structure, revenue, and the number of employees, which in some circumstances can be as high as 1,500, although the cap is usually 500. In Canada, Industry Canada defines a small business as one with fewer than 100 employees, if the business is a goods-producing one, or fewer than 50 employees, if the business is a service-based, and a medium-sized business as one with fewer than 500. The review found that in terms of business functions supported, the application of e-learning ranged from small to complex functions such as air traffic control. It is also noted a rise in holistic learning solutions like e-learning portals, COPs, and organizational blogs. The factors affecting learning technologies in the workplace were the learner's satisfaction and experience, job performance, looking at cost savings, value added, return on investment, and the Kirkpatrick model, business alignment, learning culture, design and pedagogical approaches, user profile or communication literacies, and technological infrastructure requirements. In large companies, long-term vision for e-learning and use of e-learning solutions are usually part of their staff development programs. They also tend to develop in-house applications that match the needs of the learner. Large companies often view e-learning as a competitive advantage and as a means for avoiding knowledge leakage and loss. As a result, e-learning is often incorporated in the long-term strategic plans. Some of the studies showed that learning technologies resulted in learning improvements for the business processes and better relationships with partners. They also showed e-learning is rapidly growing in large organizations as a means of knowledge management. For SMEs, the review showed that they had a short-term vision for their strategic planning and low commitment to individual and organizational learning. This is largely attributed to the required agility that SMEs need to changing market conditions and the constant constraints on resources that set training lower on their priority list. As a result, SMEs are often use an off-the-shelf training solution. This approach is criticized because it often does not connect the learner with their daily job duties and results in lower learner satisfaction. More research is needed to link high-trained and literate workforce with the ability to innovate, adapt, and survive if SMEs are to invest in learning technologies. Interestingly, SMEs in the US and EUs are trying to address problems of disadvantage and increased risk by creating strategic alliances and networks. These alliances are still new and collaboration is not the norm. Another factor is the use of technologies and the infrastructure in place to support the learners. Companies often rely on the drill and practice model as a basis for e-learning. This is because of the predominant behavioralist pedagogy within the workplace. This model is often criticized for ignoring the social aspects of learning and the contextualized nature of the human activity systems. Guralnick and Lawson point out that the power of the web is being ignored in favor of a force-fed instruction that uses tracking to keep tabs on learners' progress. And Wong points out that designers and developers are ignoring the pedagogical aspects that are necessary for the successful learning. You can really experience and feel the difference in the programs like Duolingo and the hand-washing activity, can't you? There's something more real about a system that grows with you and not just leads you through a long series of point-and-click objectives. The other point made in the article is that the use of mobile and wireless technology will begin to change the way we interact with e-learning programs and how we can choose to approach the design of new learnings which are no longer limited. The review highlighted that some of the advertised advantages of e-learning were not accepted by learners. I assume this is because distance learning was often done in addition to their regular duties and that they don't get the privileges that come with face-to-face courses like travel and accommodations and absences from work. To overcome this resistance, the learning must be made relevant to the employee. They must see a benefit for them if they are to undertake additional training on top of their regular workload. This alignment of personal goals is often seen by small and medium-sized enterprises as a luxury that only large companies can afford. Many small and medium-sized enterprises have not been able to see the link between long-term development planning and reduction of employee turnover. Additionally, the absence of socialization with professionals and experts was seen to be a problem and impacted the learner experience. Studies show that e-learning is still dominated by the drill and practice model. This might be suitable for low-level mechanic skills, but can be frustrating and constricting for the learner. How do you think a doctor with several years of advanced training would perceive the hand-washing activity? Lastly, small and medium-sized enterprises' survival is linked to agility and its ability to adapt to changing market conditions as well as emerging trends. This means that research is needed to show the link between e-learning to creativity and innovation. Some points to leave you with. Large companies have been using learning technology since the 1970s and have been incorporating staff development into long-term strategic plans, reducing turnover, external dependence, and easier knowledge dissemination. The authors point out for more studies that examine the relationship of learner-centered e-learning approaches that incorporate social negotiations of meeting, active learning, and job-embedded learning materials. They also point to the need for small and medium-sized enterprises to understand the link between e-learning and agility, survival, and adaptivity. Now for some common themes. There are many obstacles to implementing e-learning in the workplace. E-learning needs to focus on learners' needs as well as the employer's objectives. E-learning must connect the employee's social context, work environment, and corporate culture with technology. Employees' attitudes to e-learnings impact its efficacy. Organizations need to work to foster positive attitudes to e-learning. And workplaces need to ensure that e-learning initiatives do not stifle creativity and innovation. Now on to our final discussion. Please follow the link to the TED Talks by Sherry Turkle. What are the effects, if any, on e-learning in the workplace where employees create online personas? Does e-learning in the workplace create the same effects as Turkle mentions in her TED Talk, whereby people are connected but alone? We would like to thank you for your participation in our discussions and look forward to reading your responses.